Great. Well, welcome everyone to the second webinar as a part of our Fall Resiliency webinar series. So this one is going to be focusing on resilience planning in action across New York State communities. So before we get fully started with the webinar, we just wanted to explain some of the WebEx features that we have enabled in the webinar today. So if you would like to utilize closed captions on the left hand of your screen on that bottom banner, there is a CC closed captions symbol that you can click and that will enable them to work as we speak throughout the day. We also have an ASL interpreter, Kim, online today as well. So she'll be going alongside us, so you should be able to see her. And if she's not pinned to your screen, you can pin her to your screen and make it bigger so you can follow along. You can also utilize the chat. The chat will go to all of the panelists and speakers for today. So feel free to utilize that to add any comments or questions. There's also a Q&A feature. Both of those can be found on the bottom right portion of your banner. If they don't show up and there's just the three little dots, you can click that and it should have the options for the chat, Q&A, as well as enabling captions in a bank to your right-hand side. So there are a few options there, but of course, if you have any issues or have any questions or thoughts throughout the presentation, feel free to drop it in there and we'll try to address them. We're also planning to have time at the end for discussion or Q&A based on what the folks presented on today. So feel free to utilize the chat and Q&A for that as well. To warm up, utilizing the chat function and the Q&A function, we would love it if you wanted to share your name, where you're joining us from today, and what interested you about today's webinar. We feel free to add that as you continue on. We are going to introduce the speakers and panelists that we have, but feel free to keep dropping in the chat. We'd love to share out where folks are coming from today. So to meet today's speakers, I'm Lizzie Mogus Garcia. I'm an Ocean and Lakes Policy Analyst focusing in on resiliency adaptation. So I'm today's moderator, and then we are joined with wonderful panelists, including Marion Powell, Coastal Resource Specialist within the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, Melissa Keller, Revitalization Specialist in the Downtown Revitalization Initiative and New York Forward programs. We are also joined today by Paul Beyer, the Director of Smart Growth. And then we also have two extra panelists with us today, Kate Black, who's the Resiliency Lead and the LWRP unit, as well as Amanda Smith, who's the Director of DRI in New York Forward. So you'll hear from all of these folks throughout the presentation, as well during the Q&A discussion portions. So here's just an outline of what we'll be walking through today. We're going to briefly go over what resiliency means at the Department of State, cover resiliency in our planning programs, and amplify some case studies and examples of resiliency planning in action across the state. And then, like I said, we'll close out with some announcements. We are in the second version of this webinar series, so we do have a third one coming up in November. So there'll be a QR code and a link to scan if you wanted to make sure you have that information sent to you once it's closer to the date. And like I said, with whatever time we have, we'll try and get to as many questions and comments that we can. So just to start off with a quick resiliency refresher, I know we spoke a little bit about resiliency in the first session, but we just wanted to redefine it as we set the tone for today's discussion. So resilience, as we see it at the Department of State, is the capacity for a community and its ecosystem to withstand extreme events and other forces or risks, quickly recover interconnected social, economic, and ecological system structure and function in the aftermath of a disaster, and develop ongoing adaptability to rapidly changing environmental conditions and forces. And today you're going to hear about different components of what makes up resiliency and our various planning programs. Some of that may include encouraging long-term resilience by reducing future needs for infrastructure expansion, decarbonization requirements, considerations to make buildings more resilient, as well as inclusion of resilience principles within project planning, which our first webinar went over each of the resilience principles. We did record that as well, so feel free to reach out if you would like to see the recording of that. As well as model local laws that incorporate resiliency and open space preservation and land use strategies to reduce risk. So those are just some examples that you're going to be hearing about today when it comes to resiliency planning at the Department of State. So to start us off, I'm going to pass it over to Marion Powell, who will be giving us an overview of resilient planning within the local waterfront revitalization program.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Hello, everyone. My name is Marion Powell, and I am a coastal resource specialist for the local waterfront revitalization program. And today I'm going to be taking you all through using risk and resiliency tools in the local waterfront revitalization program. Next slide, please. So you may be wondering, what is an LWRP exactly, or local waterfront revitalization program or plan? So the LWRP is a long-term land and water use plan for your community and a means for implementing the program with policies, projects, and regulations. Both the plan and the implementing framework are needed for an LWRP to be complete. LWRPs begin with a planning process, which includes the formation of a waterfront advisory committee, extensive public engagement, and the creation of a planning document with 7 sections, which are listed here on the screen. The first being to define a waterfront revitalization area boundary. And this is the area of land and water within the municipal jurisdiction that is influenced by the waterfront. The second is to conduct an inventory and analysis, and this is defined within the waterfront revitalization area. The third is to add information to the policy explanations to describe how the state's 44 coastal policies apply to the revitalization area, and this can also include the 13 policies from the Long Island Coastal Management Program as well, and that is in the area of the Long Island Sound. And the fourth is for proposed future land use and priority waterfront projects. The fifth is to provide techniques that may be local actions, legislation, or programs to implement the LWRP. Sixth is to list the state agencies and programs likely to be affected by the LWRP. And finally, the 7th section is to discuss the local consultation and community participation process that was utilized to develop the LWRP. And if you're interested in learning more about LWRPs and the formation or development of an LWRP, feel free to use the QR code that you see on the screen, or I believe there'll be a link in the chat as well. And next slide, please. So as a case study, I decided to choose the town of Bethlehem's LWRP. So in the town of Bethlehem, they used resiliency within their LWRP by adding information from DOS's, or the Department of State's, risk assessment tool in their inventory and analysis section. So that's their section 2 of the LWRP. And this tool is a spreadsheet based and evaluates the flood risk posed to assets based on factors related to hazard, exposure, and vulnerability scores. And these community assets within the study area may consist of places, services, groups, or infrastructure networks, and can be categorized into 5 asset classes related to their role in the town. These 5 asset classes are economic centers, health and social services, housing, infrastructure, and natural and cultural resources. So once the hazard, exposure, and vulnerability scores are entered, the risk assessment tool produces a risk score for each asset using the formula that you can see on the screen. And based on the score, the community can identify the categories of risk, whether it being severe, high, moderate, and residual. Next slide, please. So communities can also incorporate resiliency through our LWRP program by seeking funding for an LWRP component plan. LWRP component plans take a comprehensive look at one or more coastal policies or focus on specific topic or sub area. The watershed management plans including 9 element plans are considered LWRP component plans. So water management plans also leverage intermunicipal cooperation to protect and restore specific water bodies. So as a case study, we have the Canandaigua 9-element plan. Canandaigua's 2023 9-element plan expands on the 2014 watershed plan with a focus on quantitative analysis of phosphorus, which is a key pollutant affecting water quality within the Canandaigua Lake. The 9E watershed plan analyzes existing sources of phosphorus and projects how meteorology, land cover, and management practices affect the phosphorus loading. So essentially, the Watershed Council selected a target to reduce phosphorus load by 25% over the next decade to build water quality resiliency into the watershed system. So within this plan, it also includes a summary of recommended actions to reduce their determined targets, such as the reduction of phosphorus load by 25%. And then they can also identify improvements to certain focus areas, such as water quality improvement projects throughout the watershed that are identified within their implementation strategy section. Next slide, please. So finally, for our last case study that I'd like to present for the LWRP program, it can also, so applying for our funds through the LWRP program, you can also create a coastal assessment and resiliency plan, which I'll be referring to as CARP. The CARP includes an analysis of coastal hazards that are in this case affecting East Hampton. This includes wind, precipitation, tide, storm surges, and waves are within this plan, or identified as issues within this plan. A comprehensive assessment of the town's vulnerability is also included, and you can see an example of a high-risk area in the two pictures to the right of a location called Ditch Plains, also seeing the second row of focus areas listed on the CARP on the top left. The plan also assesses the municipality's current capacity through review of existing plans, policies, and regulations. Finally, the CARP also establishes a section of recommendations for coastal resilience and adaptation strategies and the implementation actions. It is through the implementation section that the town was also able to apply for implementation funds for a current project occurring in the Montauk Business District. So the specific plan is referred to as the Sustainable Planning in Coastal Communities Project, which is built on prior planning efforts, including the town's comprehensive plan, local waterfront revitalization plan, and a coastal assessment and resilience plan. It also incorporates insights from the Nature Conservancy's Montauk Business Community Consensus Building Project, which underscores the importance of including business community in resilience planning and broadening strategies to address both environment and economic challenges. So with that, I will now be passing it over to Melissa Keller, who will discuss the DRI and New York Forward efforts as they relate to resiliency and decarbonization. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Marian. So hi, everyone. My name is Melissa, and I'm a revitalization specialist with the Department of State. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit on how we've incorporated climate mitigation efforts into our Downtown Revitalization Initiative and New York Forward programs by way of our decarbonization requirements. So building decarbonization is the process of reducing GHG emissions associated with the operation of a building. Recognizing that buildings account for nearly a third of statewide GHG emissions, we saw that building projects funded through the DRI and New York Forward programs could play a role in helping to reduce GHG emissions overall. So quickly, just for context, I'll give a rough explanation of our DRI and New York Forward programs for those who may not be familiar. So these programs are intended to be an injection of capital funds to fuel revitalization efforts in downtown areas. Our DRI program is a $10 million award, and New York Forward is meant for smaller communities at $4.5 million. Communities apply for these programs, and once they are selected, we engage in a short 6-ish month planning process to flesh out what projects the community would like to see move forward. After the planning process, the state selects the projects for funding. So not all projects going through our program need to comply with our decarbonization requirements, just those over 5,000 square feet that meet certain criteria. As you can see on the slide here, we provide a number of options for compliance so developers can best figure out which path works for them. You see those listed here. And we've also partnered with NYSERDA to develop an arsenal of educational webinars and materials for folks both going through our program and for really any building owner to help them go through the decarbonization process. These materials can be found on our website, which we'll drop into the chat. But of note, I want to point out our building decarbonization toolkit, which you'll see on the screen here. So in our toolkit, we outline 7 steps that we see going toward decarbonization. I'm not going to go into too much detail, so we can talk about our case study in a minute, but just want to mention that these are kind of to be done in a sequential order to maximize efficiencies for both energy and for costs. So I would definitely encourage folks, if you're interested in reading more about these steps, to go to our toolkit to kind of read more about them. So to see this in action, we wanted to show you this case study. So 5 Chestnut Street is in Geneseo, New York. It is a New York Forward project that is coming up on completion. You can see from the before image here that the building was vacant, maybe a little bit of an ugly eyesore. And now after you see that it's been revitalized into a productive space. So we have commercial space on the ground floor and then 3 apartments upstairs. This project was a smaller scale development with the total project cost expected to be about $1 million. But I really wanted to highlight this because I think it shows that we can make meaningful progress toward decarbonization even on a smaller scale. So some of the things that they did here in this project, they substantially improved the building envelope, included new windows, new doors, wall insulation, installed LED lighting and controls for those systems. And they also converted the HVAC system to a heat pump system and installed an electric water heater. So with all of these improvements, the impact of this project we estimate to be about 9 metric tons of CO2 saved. If you're anything like me, that's almost like speaking another language. So we were able to put 9 metric tons into EPA's greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator to kind of put this into context a little bit better. So what is 9 metric tons? This is about the same as driving 23,000 miles in your personal vehicle. About how much energy a residential home uses in about a year, a little over that. Charging a smartphone about 730,000 times. A little over 3 tons of waste recycled instead of going toward a landfill. Gives about the same impact of 9 acres of forest in a given year. And about the same impact as about 150 tree seedlings grown for about 10 years. So as you can see, a project doesn't have to be huge to really start making an impact. And that's all I have for you guys today. And with that, I'm turning it over to Paul.
Department of State. Let me start off by stating that climate resiliency is a primary principle of smart growth and therefore is embedded not just in our smart growth grant program, but in all the programs you've heard about today and others. I titled this portion Bundling State Programs to Promote Resiliency and Protect Our Investments because it may seem sometimes like state investments from different programs are granted willy-nilly, haphazardly, but that's not the case at all. We try very much here to bundle our programs so that the projects and the plans that we're supporting and funding are mutually reinforcing. And what I want to drill in on today is how we have used resiliency programs and projects to protect the investments that we've made in communities through a variety of Department of State DOS programs. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to focus on one case study of bundling, a case study in which the Department of State invested a tremendous amount of money from a variety of programs, but also ensured that those investments were protected by resiliency investments. So Oswego, New York is a downtown revitalization initiative, community and a local waterfront revitalization program community. So they've gone through the process that Marion just posited. But Oswego is a Lake Ontario shoreline community that, among many others, experienced extreme flooding and damage in both 2017 and 2019 from record high water levels. It's a combination of rainfall and the water levels in Lake Ontario, which are monitored by and regulated by Canada and the United States. These two flood events, almost back to back, 2 years apart, led to the creation of two programs that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. One is the Lake Ontario READY program, Resilient Economic Development Initiative, and the other one is the CLEAR Initiative, Coastal Lakeshore Economy and Resiliency Initiative. Next slide, please. So in order to avoid damage in the future, we really took two approaches here. One is direct funding for resilient infrastructure, and another is a strategic planning approach. READY is the big money item. The state devoted $300 million to improve resiliency in several Lake Ontario shoreline communities. It spanned 5 RED regions that comprised 8 counties. And this initiative identified priorities, at-risk infrastructure and other assets and public concerns, and then directed money to the highest priority projects that had the biggest return on investment. These communities stretch all along Lake Ontario, but they also include the St. Lawrence River region. Next slide, please. So if READY is the infrastructure project component of our work, CLEAR is the planning, the strategic planning side. CLEAR is a region-wide approach to addressing some of the resiliency strategies, plans, and projects that communities can consider when they want to become resilient. They provide guidance for communities to thrive in a changing world with variable lake levels. Now, the lake levels have remained relatively consistent since the 2017 and 2019 floods, but you just never know. So we got ahead of the game here by developing these clear plans along this region and hopefully equipping communities to take the next step to apply for, say, READY funding or funding from other sources like the Bond Act to build off of these plans and really build resiliency into their local operations and their infrastructure decisions. Next slide. So in Oswego, we directed some of our efforts in both CLEAR and READY towards that community. It's a community that has 2 waterfronts. One is Lake Ontario. The other is the Oswego River or the Erie Canal Oswego branch. But we're also heavily invested in this community through 3 other programs. The Downtown Revitalization Initiative, they received the first award in this program in 2016. It's a $10 million award to one community in each of the state's 10 regions to develop a strategic investment plan and then use that money for a slate of synergistic and shovel-ready projects that will also leverage additional investments, attract more public and private investments. We've been invested there for years, decades even, through the Brownfield Opportunity or BOA program, grant funding and technical assistance to develop area-wide plans to identify and redevelop brownfields and other vacant and abandoned sites. And finally, you heard about the local waterfront revitalization program, LWRP. We're also invested long-term in the city of Oswego through this program, and you've already heard a description of that program. So we're heavily invested here. You'll see in 2016, they got the big prize, the $10 million DRI award. But good fortune was, as I mentioned, followed by bad fortune, 2 floods in 2017 and 2019. Next slide, please. So I really want to show you how these programs work together and how we invested in resiliency to protect those investments over the years. The first thing I did when I was assigned to manage the Oswego DRI was to look at a map that showed how all of our programs overlap. It's always a good idea because many of our DRI and New York Forward communities are built on the backs of previous planning efforts like BOA and LWRP. And you'll see in the middle, the DRI boundary is almost entirely contained within both the BOA area and the LWRP area. So again, we're heavily invested in this community. We give them a big $10 million award, and then they're hit with extreme flooding events almost 2 years in a row, 2017, 2019. Next slide, please. So before I get to some of the investments that we made prior to the flooding, I just want to focus in a little bit more, get away from the words and just look at pictures here on how we're protecting these investments through resiliency projects that the state funded, many of which the Department of State administered. This is Cahill Pier, right off of the DRI area, the waterfront area that we invested in. You'll see the before picture, which is a relatively useless space that wasn't accessible and used by the community. We transformed that into a dual purpose project. One, resiliency, this protects the shoreline from flooding, but we also turned this resiliency project into a public gathering space called Cahill Pier. And it's very, it's a much used public facility. It complements the waterfront work that we invested in, like the River Walk and other investments, but it just provides another gathering space on the water that also serves as resilient infrastructure. So that's through the READY program. Next slide. Our next big READY funded program is called Wright's Landing. Their marina was almost destroyed, heavily damaged during the 2 flooding events. So again, we took another public space. It was very important to the community, but also important to local businesses in that we wanted to attract boaters and visitors to the downtown, and we invested in what's called the Wright's Landing Marina. This marina now has a number of different features that, again, serve a dual purpose: public access to the water, but also protection from extreme weather events and extreme high water level events. So those are our, next slide, please. Those are our READY investments. Again, I mentioned earlier that they got this big DRI award in 2016 and then, suffered 2 extreme flooding events while we were developing the projects through the DRI program. So this is how resiliency and our other programming comes together. In the aftermath of that flooding, while we were protecting the community, we were protecting assets like this project. We took a former abandoned and formerly contaminated manufacturing facility, the before picture. They manufactured wire. We turned that site, which is also a BOA project, a project that was supported and ultimately financed in part by the BOA program, but also supplemented with DRI funds, and we've turned it into a mixed use, mixed income project. You see the after pictures, creating housing at all price points and different varieties, from small apartments to large apartments to townhomes. Again, these are the critical investments that we are seeking to protect through our resiliency programming. Next slide. Just another example, this project is right on the waterfront. It's the oldest historic building in Oswego, so it serves a historical purpose. It also has a connection to the port and maritime history of Oswego. On the left used to be an Irish pub, so it's got that going for it. We transformed this decaying and crumbling building into what you see on the right, which is market rate apartments right on the waterfront. And if you look behind that building, if you could see behind that building, you would see some of the investments that I identified earlier to protect those investments from flooding. Next slide. Another case, before picture of another brownfield opportunity area project that ended up becoming viable because of our infusion of funding through the DRI. On the left is a suburban style mall. That's what they did in the 60s and 70s. Cities tried to emulate the suburbs, really didn't work. We took that property, very difficult project that would never have happened without the DRI and BOA, and turned it into 75 units of affordable housing right on the waterfront. Next slide, please. And finally, to pull LWRP into the equation, this is a waterfront community, obviously, and we've made significant investments over the years, not only in the plan, but also in the projects that were identified in that plan. And this is just one example of a playground right on the waterfront that, again, is protected by our resiliency investments. Next slide. So all that said, we compiled that whole presentation into what we call a Fun Fact Friday on our social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. Every Friday, we drill in on a program based around a fun fact. And during Resiliency Month, we produce this little 2-minute video that I think will sum up from our Resiliency Unit Director that I think will sum up the points.
It's National Resiliency Month, and climate resiliency starts here at the Department of State. Our new Resilience and Community Infrastructure Unit promotes the principles of climate resiliency, which is improving the ability of our state's environment to bounce back from extreme weather events, and climate adaptation, which is taking action to prepare and adjust our infrastructure and environment to handle permanent changes to New York's climate. Through the Resilient Economic Development Initiative, the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, and the Governor's Environmental Bond Act, we're supporting climate resiliency projects directly. At Wright's Landing Marina in Oswego, New York, we help stabilize the structure of their international pier to protect against flooding while upgrading it into a pedestrian-friendly park. And the improved marina enhanced recreational opportunities in the harbor while also improving access to downtown businesses. These investments also protect other local projects in downtown Oswego that the Department of State funded, like the Water Street Square Pocket Park, a community gathering space that connects the city to the waterfront, was made possible by our Downtown Revitalization Initiative. Brightbeck Park, an adjacent waterfront park, received funding through our local waterfront revitalization program to create a new playground, splash pad, and a Riverwalk promenade. And our Brownfield Opportunity Area program, together with the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, supported the development of Harborview Square, a former contaminated manufacturing site that is now a vibrant mixed-use, mixed-income housing project. So while we were revitalizing Oswego's downtown, we're also protecting its people, homes, and businesses from future flood events. That's why we say resiliency starts here at the Department of State.
Okay, thank you, Jamie Burchard, the director of our Resilient Community Infrastructure Unit. And thank you. Oh.
Thank you so much, Paul. All right, so that ends the presentation section of it. So just for a quick announcement, we have our last portion of the 3-part series. It's going to take place on November 25th. And this webinar is going to be focusing on implementing resilience. So diving into how DOS programs can help put resiliency plans and projects into action. So taking what we learned today and pushing it further and having some other guest speakers on there. So if you'd like to stay in the know, or if you're interested in passing along the information for this webinar, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen or use the link that will be dropped in the chat to sign up for it. And then the registration information will get sent to you closer to the date of November 25th. All right, so thank you very much. And here's a QR code for the Department of State Resiliency Planning website. The link, it will also be put in the chat. And if you would like to email us, it's opd@dos.newyork.gov. And then JP, who's our virtual captain today, will also put that into the chat. So we will stop sharing the screen now and move into the Q&A discussion. So feel free, if there are any questions that you had about what was presented on today, drop that into the chat or the Q&A, and we will get those answered for you. So I invite back our speakers, Melissa, Marion, and Paul, as well as we also have Amanda and Kate joining us for the panel. Right. Let's see. So we do have a question here for our panelists here. What are the incentives provided to the developer to incorporate these resiliency components?
I think that might have been in regards to the decarbonization presentation. And in terms of incentives, so projects going through our program that are over 5,000 square feet are required to comply with decarbonization. However, in the toolkit, if you do reference that, there are some additional funding opportunities that folks can tap into. So we have those listed there.
Great, thank you, Melissa. All right, let's see what else we have. I do see a question if the first part of the series will be available for those who were able to make this. Yes, we do have that recorded, so I believe we're working to get that uploaded for folks, but feel free to send us an email or a message and we can make sure that you get the alert once we have that posted. Thank you for asking. The next question is, could we have the classes and levels of risk in the tool that's in the chat? So that might be also toward you, Melissa, or maybe the risk tool to Marion.
So there is, so the risk assessment tool is a tool that is Lizzie, it's on, they can access it right from the DOS website, right? It is posted.
Yes, I believe you can
And
get on the, yep, go ahead.
And then as part of that tool, there's a bunch of resources and education on how to complete it, how to identify your the infrastructure and things you're going to look at, and then kind of based on how you assess and complete that form, you know, kind of flushes out where your biggest risks are. Yeah, Lizzie, if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, and I think too, we can drop in the chat our New York State Geographic Information Gateway that also has a lot of information on this, as well as risk area maps if folks wanted to dig into it a little bit deeper. So we'll make sure we get that link in there as well. Thank you, Kate. Let's see here. Oh yeah, they were clarifying it was for the risk assessment LWRP tool. There's a question about seeing a great deal of infrastructure resilience. Is there any addressing resiliency from more of a people perspective, such as like healthy living, etc.? Maybe Paul, you have an answer to that question.
Daily cost of living, I don't see that connection. However, you know, in protecting investments like the ones I focused on in Oswego from flooding, you're certainly saving the community any costs of damage that would have occurred had we not invested in that resiliency infrastructure, particularly in Oswego, the businesses that suffered for so long after the flooding in the 2017 and 2019. If you want to go broader and talk about affordability in general, Oswego is another great case study because they created 200 units of housing through the DRI in the downtown, over half of which is considered affordable or workforce. So we're creating affordable housing, middle income and low income housing in prime waterfront locations. And so that will, you know, those opportunities feed into the governor's overall affordability agenda.
I would say too, in general, you know, I think that looking at community resiliency is, you know, not just like you were saying, the infrastructure piece of it, but ensuring that, you know, the community as a whole and those connections and that social fabric can withstand events is really critical. Um, and there are some resources out there. Um, but it is one of those like very complicated pieces. One of the things we really focus on at DOS is ensuring that there is a lot of public participation and engagement, and really working to make our programs accessible and understood by all, and working to ensure that like the meetings, the materials, events are accessible to ensure that all members of a community can access our resources and our information. Um, but yes, looking at the entire community as a whole, from everything, you know, from education and community relationships and all of that, is very complicated. And I don't think any of our planning programs necessarily capture that um, that the breadth of that, you know, that magnitude. But we do recognize that as part of a community, and the state being, you know, more resilient.
Thank you, Kate, for adding into that. Some folks would like to hear more about resiliency related to extreme heat. If anyone had any thoughts on that, or if there were any resources that we could point them to.
Yes, we participated with the lead agency, Department of Environmental Conservation, on an extreme heat action plan. It's on their website, and it put together a strategic plan for the entire state, but it also focused on specific projects and specific areas of concern. That is a huge issue for us here at the Department of State, because we're investing in urban centers, and that's where you have the greatest, what's known as urban heat island effect. So those two initiatives, you know, work in tandem. And if you really want to learn more, go to the DEC's website and just look for Extreme Heat Action Plan, EHAP, and you'll get more detail.
And I will also note, as part of like the LWRP process, that can be something you look at and explore. We definitely see implementation projects that people are proposing involving increasing tree canopy cover in, you know, public parks, along, you know, like streetscaping, things like that, trying to green some more areas that maybe has historically been more industrial, or have a lot of impervious surface that would add to the urban heat island effect.
Great, thank you. There's another question about green infrastructure. So has green infrastructure such as roofs, rain gardens, etc., been considered for community planning?
I'll say for LWRP, we do a lot of planning through the actual local waterfront revitalization program, but then also watershed management plans that can have a pretty substantial focus on green infrastructure, and for its benefits for resiliency, for its benefits for water quality, for, you know, I mean, MS4 requirements, for those familiar with MS4. So we see it a lot in the LWRP unit. Less so green roofs, because we usually tend to be focusing more on, you know, like the public infrastructure and public access to the waterfront.
And for DRI forward, because we deal with public, private, and not-for-profit sponsors, this is definitely something that can be discussed by the individual on where they would like to go with their project. That goes through the community engagement portion. And then if those projects are awarded, they're teased out and designed more heavily And all those things we can fund through DRI and New York Forward capital funding, and then can also spin off of some of the decarb requirements additionally that might be required based on those thresholds. So it is definitely something that we can fund through those programs as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, let's see if there are any other questions in here. We might have actually answered all of them, which is fantastic. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we can close out early. We appreciate you all joining us today and joining us in the discussion. If there's anything else that you have for us, feel free to drop in the chat. Otherwise, we will close out and stop the recording. But thank you very much, everyone. And thank you so much to our panelists and our speakers today.
Thank you.